Today's show is sponsored by CloudZero. For software-driven companies focused on growing margins, CloudZero is the only cloud cost intelligence platform that puts engineering in control by connecting technical decisions to business results. By analyzing cloud services like AWS and Snowflake, CloudZero provides real-time cost insights that help you maximize margins. Engineering teams can answer critical questions like, who are my most expensive customers? How much does this specific feature cost our business? What's the cost impact of re-architecting this application? With cost anomaly alerts via Slack, product-specific data views, and granular engineering context that makes it easy to investigate any cost, CloudZero is your complete cloud cost intelligence platform, connecting the dots between high-level trends and individual line items. Join companies like Drift, Rapid7, and SeatGeek by visiting cloudzero.com/cloudcast to get started today. That's cloudzero.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And as I hit record on this, it is the first week of June, and the news is picking up. And sometimes in the summer, the news is a little slow, but we've got a number of articles this week. Actually, if you go look in the document, the Cloud News of the Week links, there's going to be more links this week than we're going to talk about, which is a good thing. So we're going to jump right into the first one. First one is our friends over at Datadog have introduced their annual State of Serverless report and a lot of really great insights. I'm not going to go into all of them here, but some of the big ones that I took away. Over half of organizations, if they're operating in the cloud, they have adopted serverless in some way, shape, or form, with AWS being over 70% as well. And so it makes, of course, perfect sense that Lambda then is the most called serverless method. And the next one we like to talk about is languages. Python and Node.js, they remain dominant, just like they always have. So no surprise there. But maybe one that is a surprise is if those are the only two that are big ones, well, over 60% of the large organizations have deployed Lambda functions in at least 3 different languages. So more than likely those two, as well as another one as well. And I'll just pick out one or two more here that I found interesting. API Gateway, actually for Lambda specifically in AWS, calls over 50% of the Lambda calls. And then they actually break it down into what they call single purpose functions or monolithic functions. Basically, does it do a single purpose or is it doing all in one, doing a number of functions and doing a little bit of automation once it's called as well? In that instance, single purpose functions are more than 80%. So looks like API Gateway calling these things for single purpose functions. A lot of other really good insights in the report as well. I'll let you go take a look for the rest of the details on that. For our second story, we've been saying it for a little bit now that, this industry is very cyclical, and at times, everything's doing well, and then at times it gets a little brutal. And so TechCrunch did an article. There's been over 15,000 tech layoffs just in the month of May. Some of them are PayPal, Instacart, Snap, and Bolt are just a few that you may recognize. So unfortunately, there's a bit of belt tightening kind of going on, which is, with the state of the economies worldwide, is a bit to be expected. Moving on to our third article, the folks over at KubeCost just released an open source initiative called OpenCost. And just as the name states, open source project that helps companies with tools around Kubernetes cost monitoring and optimization. It's well known. It's it can be a problem in the industry. And the bigger the Kubernetes platform gets at a location, typically the more expensive it gets as well. Now, what I do like about this is it is backed by AWS, Google, Adobe, New Relic, SUSE, and a bunch of others. So it does seem to have legs, and it makes perfect sense as well. So that'll be something really interesting as this goes forward. And I'm going to wrap up cloud news of the week there. As I mentioned in the articles, we have other things out there. There's MongoDB cloud earnings, HashiCorp earnings, as well as our good friends over at Cloud at Judgment did a really nice article on subscription versus consumption models. So if any of that is of interest to you, definitely go check it out. And coming up after the break, we have Miles Ward talking about shared responsibilities for cloud providers.
If you're a software engineer, you've been there. You're finally relaxing after a long day and you get paged. Something's broken. Are the servers down? Is the database slow? Is there a bug in the latest deployment? Now the whole team is panicked, going from tool to tool and person to person to troubleshoot the problem. That won't happen if you get New Relic. New Relic brings together 16 monitoring tools so teams can see across the entire stack from one place. More importantly, with New Relic, you can pinpoint problems down to the line of code to fix problems more quickly. That's why more than 14,000 companies, including DoorDash, GitHub, and Epic Games, use New Relic to debug and improve their software. The next late night call is just waiting to happen. Get New Relic before it does. You can get the whole New Relic platform and 100 gigs of data free forever. No credit card required. Just visit newrelic.com/cloudcast. That's newrelic.com/cloudcast.
And we're back. And, folks, one of the things that we talk about all the time, but I don't know that we've ever really dug into it, is, we talk all the time about the growth of the public cloud, the growth of how much people are using the public cloud. Companies are not only building new things in the cloud, but they're also, bringing existing applications to the cloud. And one of the things that, for good or bad, that they often bring to the cloud is whatever operational model they were used to having in their data center, whether it was how they provisioned things, how they secured things, how they thought about resources. Oftentimes, getting to the cloud may not be that complicated, but trying to help them evolve how they operate in the cloud, how they think about, compliance and other things. Sometimes requires some mind shift that happens there, because your relationship with your cloud provider is different than it was when you owned everything. And a lot of times we talk about that and we call it a shared responsibility model, right? And the cloud providers, do a pretty good job of writing down like what they think they're responsible for. And to a certain extent, they're going to sort of let you know what you're responsible for. And what we need to make sure we do is read those things, but more importantly, kind of learn from experience, learn from best practices as to how to really implement that stuff. And so today, really excited to have Miles Ward, who is CTO at SADA. Miles, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brian, thank you so much. I am super excited to participate.
You're an interesting guy. We've been following you for a long time on Twitter. You are not only somebody who, as I'll say, has done some things, but also, is very bold about, talking about what's going on in the cloud, having lived through a lot of things. You've been at sort of the foundation of building a lot of stuff that I think, whether people know your name or not, they use on a daily basis. So before we dive into anything else, give us a little bit of your background and let's talk about some of those really kind of big, bold, foundational things that you've built over the years.
Sure. Let's do some blasts from the past. I totally dig it. So, I'm here at SADA. I'm CTO. I've been doing that for about 3 years. And the platform here, it has been pretty incredible to grow. We are almost 4 times larger in terms of staff count, and many times larger in terms of customer impact than we were even just 3 years ago. I've spent 5 years before that at Google Cloud, building the solutions architecture practice. So I was in the first 200 employees in all of cloud at the time. GCP's cloud events were booths at their then Google Apps events, right?
Nice.
So millions of dollars of cloud revenue, not hundreds or billions like they report now. It's a $20 billion business today. So it grew radically in the period of time that I was there. I was responsible for all of the material that you'd see at cloud.google.com/solutions or cloud.google.com/architecture. Built the architecture diagram system together with my buddy Chucky, built the pricing calculator together with my buddy Oleg, and generally stood up how Google would engage with macro scale customers. So led the technical engagement with Twitter to migrate their 300 plus petabyte Hadoop environment from really crunchy data centers into Google Cloud, where it works a little nicer, and built a team that moved basically all of the major customers over the course of that 5-year period. I learned how to do that stuff by spending 4 years at AWS and 6 years at my own startup before that. On the AWS side, we had a super pesky customer in Reddit that refused to not work in anything other than a single zone in a single region. And so we wrote this checklist of all the things that you're not supposed to do when you run on AWS. That checklist has grown up and gotten like a couple more pages, and now it's called the well-architected framework that many folks use. I also spent a bunch of cycles with Rhett Dillingham launching provisioned IOPS EBS, the first of the solid state and managed storage devices there. Built the first solutions, owned the Microsoft relationship for a long time. Really worked very hard to help customers be successful with cloud. And at the startup, did all of the things that happened right before cloud, right? Broke every one of the different kind of database applications that they were, did horrible things in data centers, made immensely bad purchase decisions repeatedly, and basically like primed myself to be the one that would know exactly why he should learn so much about all this cloud stuff, because I had experienced every single point of pain that cloud solves for. So it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, no, I'm smiling because, like I said in the intro, you've done some things. It's some good stuff there. I want to dive for a second into SADA.
Sure.
As from a an outsider's perspective, I view the company, and my understanding of the company is basically, and I don't know how anybody would measure this, but basically, anytime there is a big customer doing complex stuff in Google Cloud, they work with you guys. You guys are sort of, world-class systems integrators, partners with customers. Give us a real quick rundown on SADA, because that's probably not a very good explanation of what you do or where you are in the market.
No, I think it's not far off. SADA is Google's largest resale and implementation partner. We do the work to help customers be successful with the radical level of innovation that sits inside of Google's cloud tech, right? The product's great. And if you look at what it takes to adopt any hyperscaler, I think the adoption curve for Google Cloud is relatively low. It's the easiest one by far. I've tried them all. I had to write a bunch of the manuals for several of them. I promise the manual for GCPs is shorter. But it's still work, and it's still risk, and it's still something that customers are unfamiliar with, right? In reality, public cloud is what, 7-ish% of global infrastructure consumption. Right. So this is still like 15 years almost in the outlier, the unusual way of doing stuff, and the manuals are still being written. So when we go to tiny startups that are trying to figure out how to build it right the first time, all the way through to huge enterprises, they have the same question. How am I supposed to do this in a way that pays dividends for my business over time? How do I accelerate the path to value? How do I use this thing for what it's for, which is to make me faster and more capable of change, instead of what I think maybe some folks mistake it as is another way of buying stuff. Right. So we spent a lot of cycles. There's hundreds now of dedicated professional services folks that are working hand in hand, in direct, hands-on keyboard, pushing code to repositories, switching the instance selections, doing the actual legwork to make it so that customers are really successful with the platform, which I think is an incredible spot, right? We're right at the contact patch between the tires and the road, where the change actually happens and you get the little bit of smoke and fire. Yeah.
No, that's good. I feel like you in particular, and obviously, your background is sort of particularly well suited for this conversation, because on one hand, we want to talk about what cloud providers are responsible for. And on the
Sure.
other hand, you now essentially represent their customers in trying to get them to work with the cloud providers to make them successful. Let's take this topic, sort of shared responsibility. Where do you think, how should people think about this in terms of, from a customer's, let's take it from the customer's perspective. Maybe I'm a sort of typical mid-sized, larger size company. Some aspect of what we're going to do is move to the cloud. Like, how do I think about what my responsibility is going to be, the cloud provider's responsibility? Give me a way to think about that's tenable and doable.
Sure. I think there's a couple of really important macro trends to internalize as every company is kind of making this decision in their market space at their scale with their relative reliance on technology as a part of delivering value to customers. So the one of them is that there is a massive movement of focused engineering talent in research and development into the hyperscalers. But Google's spending a lot, Amazon and Azure are two, billions of dollars being spent to make these things easier and more reliable and more consistent, because they hear repeatedly from customers those are the benefits that they want to earn from an environment that they're willing to pay for by the second. So unless you are a company ready to spend billions of dollars in R&D, you are going to get outrun by the cloud provider's ability to innovate in the lowest layer of the infrastructure, not to mention their ability to procure, right? Like, you go buy 1,000 computers, that's quaint. Google's buying, on the order of a fifth of the x86 that gets manufactured worldwide. So I have this sneaking suspicion that they get a slightly better deal than you do. So if you've already recognized that the cloud providers are procurement advantaged, they're advantaged in terms of R&D. They have vastly more R&D muscle than you probably do. They also, very often, every single one of them has other businesses, right? Google maybe has the best other business from cloud compared to the rest, right? Retail is a lovely task, but it's not all that hard from a computer science standpoint, right? Like, you and I can go run a Shopify or download a site manager for running a shopping cart. It's hard to have enough machines to keep up with the kind of demand that they've got, but you're not trying to process exabytes of data analytically for being able to better help with advertising, right? Like, that the computational problem Google is off to try and solve is an order of magnitude harder than the one that Microsoft is solving or the one that Amazon is solving for their day job. So that also means that there's this treasure trove of existing innovation that they just have to sort of like package up and hand out to customers. So as a buyer of these services, you've got to recognize that almost every company is going to feel, at least in this area, a little like a remora to the shark, right? Like, they are $1 trillion huge businesses chewing their way through giant problem spaces, and like the chunks of tasty, useful, utilizable infrastructure that they spin off are more than big enough for every company you and I have ever heard of. Right. So being able to understand the size and shape of those chunks and what your responsibility is in this new pattern is really critical knowledge. And I think it's sort of under-articulated in the manuals and the examples, because a lot of this stuff is sensitive, right? Like, as a cloud provider, you want to say everything's perfect. As an operator, you got to know where it's not, so that you can build around that or anticipate it, right? Every one of the cloud providers has better reliability by a lot than the data centers I built for my startup, right? Our startup went down we were happy when a downtime or an outage was measured in single-digit days. Right, and cloud providers get pissed about single-digit minutes. So it is a radically different operational context for the vast majority of businesses. But if you recognize that, they're going to go down for shorter periods of time, but they're probably going to go down more often because they have more products at a higher change rate than you did. Thinking through kind of what your disaster and recovery protocols look like different if you're running in data center or multiple data centers in comparison to running in cloud. You probably want slightly longer lag times before you initiate disaster recovery, because there is a higher likelihood that they're going to recover in advance of the timeline that it takes for you to complete a disaster recovery. So it's little operational nuances like that cloud requires a bit of a reevaluation, a rethink. And that's the spot where consultancies like ours end up spending a lot of cycles, is aggregating the experience from thousands, literally, of customer interactions and helping them understand kind of what the differences are and how to plan for that in a way that is compatible with a modern business.
Yeah. And I think, you sort of highlight what I've heard from a lot of companies is, whether I'm working with Google or Amazon or Microsoft, and you really highlighted the important thing, which is like, if I go look at any of those companies' balance sheets, the amount of money you make on search or video distribution or retail or delivering Office 365 or whatever dwarfs your cloud business. And so when I come to you and I say, look, that's all cool, and I'm happy to take advantage of all the super brain power you have, but I run an insurance company. We make pharmaceuticals. Like, we don't do the stuff that you do. I want to take advantage of that, but we've run a data center for 20 years. We've been very successful doing that. Like, how do I make sure I'm asking the right questions, or what are the right questions for me to be asking, such that I go, look, I know you're super smart and awesome, but like, I just need to make sure that like the manufacturing line doesn't go down, or I don't, I don't leak credit card information such that I'm on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. Is that important to you, right? Like, how do I'm curious how those conversations are happening, because I hear them a lot. People go like, we want to go to the cloud, but like, we know the cloud's different. Walk me through some of how both sides sort of think about that in that context, not the context of like, you're spending hundreds of billions of dollars. Cool, you're solving all sorts of problems. Like I care about my business. How do I deal with that problem? That context.
Right. So I think a couple of important pieces for every business owner to internalize, right? If you look at kind of where the current state of the art is and where the biggest investments have been made, all of the cloud platforms are in one way or another still designed for developers, for folks building software. And there is this correlation over on the far side that says, if you're not intending to sell software that you build to your direct competitors, you probably maybe should not build that. Okay. Right? Yep. SaaS providers are the middle layer there, where they go, oh, okay, awesome. Right. We're going to build a project management application. And if somebody else that does project management wants to buy it, we don't care. It sounds fine to us. Let's rock and roll. Right. That level of interaction is critical. So I'll give an example that'll crystallize this. You want to talk about like folks that have been places and done things. I was in a meeting with Adrian Cockcroft when Amazon explained to Netflix that they were going to launch Prime Video and become a direct competitor. And you might imagine, like has constantly been the kind of backdrop in this industry, that like, what a bummer, now Amazon's coming to compete. Like that'll mean you have to sort of like lower prices and get super confrontational with them. Adrian had utterly the opposite take. He was like, oh, thank God, that means you're actually going to build the stuff I need. So I think the actual problem for most of these businesses that are not themselves technology native is that the hyperscale cloud providers do not have the problems that they have, and so are not building the solutions that those companies need. Very often, there is this middle layer where what really the cloud providers are building, I think, is by far the most efficient place for building new scaled applications in the world. Like Google's core mission is to empower those businesses that are delivering value by way of software. That's synonymous with SaaS companies. So I think the strategy, if you think about how many different kinds of companies there are, like I sat down with my team really early on. We had a somewhat naive salesperson who was like, well, why can't we just have a solution for every type of company that's out there for all the things that they do with technology? I kind of giggled. So we started beating up a whiteboard and we stopped at 1,700 use cases, and we didn't even feel like we had scratched the surface. The problem for cloud providers is the world is huge and complicated, and it needs millions of pieces of software to solve the individual finite problems in these end customers. And as I know a lot, I mean, Google's to hundreds of product managers now. That's not hundreds, that's tens of thousands. So in order to be able to make that work, to be able to get end solutions that are directly consumable by customers that solve explicit problems they have, you're going to have to sponsor a broader ecosystem of developers. That's a spot where Google also has an incredibly unique advantage as the one that is hugely invested in open source, not sort of like a late arriver to that idea, as the one that has always been about platforms and ecosystems, right? Android instead of iPhone, right? Like maps as an ecosystem instead of just you buy a map box, right? Like those kinds of Chrome as this enormous developer landscape, right? Those kinds of approaches are the way that Google has always thrived, and it is bringing and using that same approach in cloud. So if I think about a SaaS business trying to handle the expansion to global, trying to handle the security constraints that are required in every one of the different countries, trying to be able to make it so that they have a unified developer experience. They don't have to build it 15 different ways to be in 15 different places. There's nobody that solves that problem better than Google. And because of that, those companies will be the ones that solve that end problem for most end consumers of technology. I think for most companies, the ratio of stuff that they have to build shrinks every year, and the build versus buy determination becomes exceedingly tilted toward the buy side when someone else has decided they can take VC dollars and the incredible technology and cloud providers and just use them to solve the problem that you have. So if you can find somebody that's doing that, I think in almost every case, for most businesses that don't have hundreds of software developers already, the most efficient thing to do is to get really close to their product managers and hammer the nuances of your use case into them so that they build what you need, right? And be a great customer rather than, their product is missing 2 features. We could do better. We're going to build it on our own. I don't see a lot of companies actually outrun folks that are focused on individual problems like that.
Right. So it almost becomes the best way to leverage the cloud is to almost start over from a mindset perspective, right? Like don't bring your sort of existing operational model, maybe your existing way of doing things, because quite honestly, maybe you could just improve those a little bit. If you really are wanting to change the company, right? Change your company, change how you, like you said, how you interact with markets, how you interact with data, how you interact with your customers, whatever. Start from that mindset and then begin to look at, like, what are the things that you can literally take off your plate from what you did before and start from there. Is that sort of maybe the mindset to take into some of these things when you're working with the cloud, especially if you want to take advantage of their innovation?
I think there was kind of an early sensation that, and I think Amazon was the predominant driver of this stuff. They used to have events where the customers of theirs would bring their last server out and you'd all smash it with a sledgehammer, right? Yay, I'm all on cloud and I don't use anything else other than cloud. That makes total sense if you are exclusively going to deliver value by way of technology, and you're able to do that through the tools that cloud providers have built. From what we can tell, given that 7% number, that's not most companies. Most companies have local requirements. They've got to be able to, they're not going to tolerate being offline if the internet is offline. They have a lot of needs. And so I don't think that for most businesses, it makes sense for them to start from the position that we are going to burn everything else that's not cloud down and move everything to cloud. I think that ends up being the solution for plenty of businesses. I'm not saying that it's not a viable path, but I don't know if you should start the thinking there. Instead, do what I think is vastly more pragmatic. Find the place where cloud is doing something you don't think you can do today, where you think that that's just far beyond your reach, and use it to shorten the path to innovation. So lots of my customers go, I run our website fine, and our app server for the ERP is fine. Like, I don't know anything about my data. Help me get further in data analytics, in machine learning, and data processing. You start to look through the level of difference in the performance of cloud. Take BigQuery on the Google side. I've got customers that are in the data serving space. They work with data all day. It is the core of their value delivery to customers. We move them from their existing legacy environment onto BigQuery. Their systems at the end, not just like internal benchmark stuff, all the way out to the end to customers, are 11 times faster than before. That's not something that they can design on their own. So, and if it was, they would have done it already, right? Like that's just standing on this R&D advantage that the hyperscalers have. And that pattern is going to play out over and over again. You could write your own framework for doing matrix calculus and assemble a whole bunch of functions into a library, or you can just use TensorFlow. It's free, and it makes machine learning relatively straightforward. And there's patterns for doing that automatically in a whole bunch of the products, right? Like we have customers that are finding it easier to do what to their stakeholders is going to feel like a next generation solution, something that really pushes the capabilities of the business forward, than it is to go clean up the mess in the back. For example, for IBM, the mainframe business is a growing business, right? Cloud is growing. Cloud's growing faster. And I think businesses, we've got great stats. It's actually, ironically, comes from Dell, where they describe that companies that are on cloud, that are major users of cloud, have revenue growing 53% faster than the companies that aren't. So there's clearly financial drivers to get into a place where you can be more dynamic and more reactive to customer needs. But I don't think the highest and best use of cloud is cleaning up your ancient stuff, right? Like it's just the highest friction spot. Yep. If those places are really a problem and they're harming the business because they don't work, cloud's a great place to build what's next. And we got plenty of customers that successfully migrate all sorts of stuff. I'm not saying that that's not possible, but it's maybe not the quickest path to the highest value.
Yeah, no, I think I think there's a lot of there's a lot of sort of good rationale behind that. Let me ask you one last question, because obviously you're very, very busy. I want to come back to Google Cloud a little bit. So, one of the challenges with all the cloud providers is they've all reached a point of, probably literally 100 services. There's announcements coming out all the time. You get a chance to work with Google Cloud quite a bit. Like, what are some of those 2 or 3 things that the really cool things you're able to uniquely do with Google Cloud that if you're running a business, you're trying to differentiate. Like, what are some of those really cool things that maybe people don't totally know about, or you're seeing implemented like all the time that you're just like, this is super powerful. This is sort of industry game changing kind of stuff.
Yeah, I remember being at Amazon and meeting Eric Schmidt and him suggesting that I should come over and work, and I said, well, why? Well, I don't think you guys are in the lead. He was like, I have a couple white papers you need to read. I said, okay. So I read the white papers that he sent. One of them was the Spanner white paper. Spanner is the structured relational database that Google custom designed so that it would never have to do a schema migration ever again. That database is globally transactionally consistent. Those 3 words are very important and rather startlingly expensive when you start to unpack what it takes to get a thing to do that. There are competitive products from Amazon and Azure. They do not provide strong global transactional consistency for relational workloads. And that difference means superpowers. So like from foreign exchange desks that can run 24/7 because they do not have to wait for a remote sync because it's already synced, to all the way over to folks at Dragon Ball Z building a game where you can shoot fireballs at your buddies from Japan to Europe and it works. It is consistent and reliable. They can run tournaments across 2 oceans and it functions. So that's like the only way to be able to build a thing like that is to have all of the ingredients that it lists out in the white paper. You need a true time service built on atomic clocks. You need GPS devices in the data centers to determine tectonic drift, which deforms time. You have to be able to get to a global locking service, right? These are hard innovations that cost big dollars that sit behind a bunch of the other tools that customers end up getting. So like you have this kind of hardcore innovation, and in a normal environment, like, you go to Amazon, you want to use DynamoDB, they say you're going to have to write to the Dynamo API. It speaks Dynamo. You're going to write code for us in custom. So you want to talk to Spanner, you can write Postgres. You just talk the Postgres API and they shim it to our friend Spanner in the back. So from an adoption standpoint, it's trivial in comparison to the just brutal work that it takes to get into these other proprietary databases. That's an easy example. Another one that's crazy is all of the work in auto ML. So, if you're, it's one thing to try and build a machine learning model, and if you've ever done it by hand, there's this moment where you are trying to design what's called a neural network. That network is a seemingly arbitrary combination of steps to be able to extract features from the data that you're interacting with and use it to inform the predictions or categorizations or responses that the model generates on the output side. That process is extraordinarily complicated and is typically done by folks with high-level degrees in mathematics. So you might imagine that we are limited as an industry by way of being able to build these things. Google cheated. It's built so many models. It built a machine learning model for building machine learning models. So you go into BigQuery, you've got a bunch of columnar data. This is how many sales we got in the West, and here's how many different customers transacted in Brazil. You can literally add a column and say, I want this column to predict the results of these other two columns, and it will just do it. Like, it doesn't have to know anything beyond that. That's no code, no PhD, no vector calculus. You're kind of off to the races, right? So that stuff's nuts. And I think probably the funnest one, we were talking about how few of the businesses really at that scale, right? All of the kinds of companies. You used an insurance company. That's a good, easy example. The banks, all the rest of that, right? Like, nobody's decided yet to launch a bank that literally has no physical facilities. They have ones that are kind of online banks, but they still got to have some place where you can drive and show up and talk to somebody if you have a real issue. So those kinds of physical spots, all the manufacturing plants, all the restaurants, all the spots where the hospitals, right? Every place where you have to be able to interact, you need compute resources there. So we use Anthos, which is a managed environment for Kubernetes. That's the open source project to orchestrate everybody's computers. And that lets us build stuff like this. I'm holding up a computer that SADA has built called a toaster. That's a way to run a little chunk of public cloud in your office. I have two of them sitting in my rack. I can deploy containers and connect back to database services and build scaled applications here, local. And I think that's an enormous trend that everybody's got to watch, as the cloud providers want to make the barrier of entry lower and lower and lower, as they'll bring more and more of this tech closer and closer to the problem. And that trajectory only benefits customers because it enables competition. So right now you can use BigQuery on Amazon, on Azure. You have data that sits over there in S3, no problem. It's called BigQuery Omni. They will run the processing on your behalf over there. So you don't have to wait for data to migrate back and forth. That trend, if it plays out, means you can run every cloud provider on every cloud provider. Okay, now we've really made things easier. So I'm looking forward to the progress there.
Yeah, very, very cool stuff. Miles, we've dug into, we just sort of scratched the surface. This has been really interesting, both from a perspective of like how to think about responsibility with the cloud providers, how to maybe avoid some mistakes and stuff. Sure. Really, really good stuff. Folks, I want to, on behalf of Aaron and I, we want to thank Miles for his time today. We learned a lot. There are some links in the show notes if you want to not only pick his brain, reach out to him, but also, dig into the stuff that the folks at SADA are doing with Google Cloud. I think, as he talked about, lots of really interesting possibilities with the powerful technology that's over there. Miles, thanks again for the time. Folks, I'm going to wrap it up there. We want to thank you all for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. Thanks for helping us grow the show. And with that, we will wrap it up. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.